Welcome to episode 4 of Ape Answers, the ham radio show where we answer your questions. In today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about antenna chokes. Now, we use antenna chokes, or chokes at our antenna feed point, to balance currents between our transmission line and our antennas. They also suppress common mode current. You can place chokes in other places along your transmission line, like between your coaxial cable and your antenna tuner, to help suppress common mode currents as well. We're going to talk about that in today's video, so let's look at the question. Today's question comes to us from John 3. Great content, Ape. Well, thank you, John. Quick question for you, sir. I'm running an end-fed half wave. Does that also require a choke at the feed point, or does the nature of the end-fed half wave having a balun serve that purpose already? So technically, the end-fed half wave has an unun, and it's typically a 49-to-1 transformer. Sometimes folks will use a 36, sometimes they use, I think it's a 56 or a 64, but most of the time it's a 49-to-1. And so the answer is no, I would put a choke at the feed point in between your coaxial cable and your unun. John also asked, should I add a choke to the feed point of a DX commander? I got one in the mail on the way. I don't have much experience with verticals. So I would, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in some diagrams that I made. And he says, I've been choking most things just prior to the radio because I have some long coax runs, but I see the value of choking at the feed point to ensure the coax doesn't become part of the antenna. I guess choking at both ends makes sense and wouldn't hurt. So let's take a look at some diagrams. So this is a rather simple diagram that depicts an end-fed half wave in what's called an inverted L configuration. So that means it runs vertically up and then over to one side or the other. Typically, you would want to have around 2/3 of your antenna running up vertically. The squiggly line at the bottom represents our counterpoise, and I didn't hear John mention anything about a counterpoise. So we want to use a counterpoise on our antennas to give our antennas something to work against. And I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but we use alternating current in our antennas, AC current, and it works off of current going one direction on one line and the opposite direction on the other, and it switches back and forth. And when we use something like a counterpoise, it acts like a big capacitor, storing and releasing energy. A lot of folks will tell you, hey, it's fine, bro. Go ahead and use your coaxial cable outer shield as your counterpoise. And that current that goes down the shield of the coaxial cable is seeking a path to ground. And when it goes onto your coaxial cable, it's going to go into your ham shack. Now, we can attenuate or suppress that current a little bit using things like chokes, but it's really not a good idea because that current can travel on the outside of our coaxial shield. And what that does is can generate interference that may be picked up or detected by your radio or your antenna and can cause you some problems with your noise floor. The other thing is that by making your coaxial cable part of your antenna system, it can radiate and receive signals that you don't want. So on here, I have a couple of boxes. T means transformer and C means choke or choke balun. And we have the 49-to-1 transformer right at the feed point of the antenna. It's actually part of the antenna, as you can see depicted here. And then immediately behind that, we have a choke like you discussed. I also will put a choke right before my tuner, and sometimes in between my radio and tuner. And that will help me control and balance currents and suppress any common mode currents that I might have. Now, please excuse my rather rudimentary depiction of a DX commander. A lot of people say to me, they ask me a lot of questions about DX commanders, and they say, well, it's really just a vertical fan dipole. Well, it's really a vertical fan monopole. It's not a dipole because you really don't have a symmetric half on the ground. What you have is a collection of radials or a ground plane that helps capacitively couple your antenna to ground. And it acts as a large counterpoise that will allow you to push and pull those currents that we talked about earlier. You can see a box C right at that antenna feed point on the coaxial cable. And I would absolutely 100% put a balun choke there because your antenna is non-symmetric, and that means it's prone to common mode currents. I would also, again, put a choke at the tuner and the radio just to make sure that I don't have any currents or any unwanted interference coming into my ham shack across my transmission line. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. And remember, if you ask a question, you might be featured in a future video. Thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate it.